So today on Sports File, this is a request from my good pal Todd Forgrave in Woodstock. He wanted me to look at some of the intellectual saviors of the various pro wrestling federations over the last 75 years. Now, if you know what an intellectual savior is in wrestling, it's a wrestler, a character, a manager, an announcer who basically thinks that the viewers are below them, that they're peons, that they're not worth the price of admission that they paid to see them. And of course, the first and greatest of these intellectual saviors was Gorgeous George. Now, Gorgeous George harkens back to a time in wrestling where television was first starting to pick up, Dumont Network especially. Now, Gorgeous George was a very effeminate character who basically had a valet that used perfume to disinfect the ring, and he used to throw bobby pins to the crowd as sort of a derision, saying, you must worship me, and here's some bobby pins that keeps my gorgeous hair in place. Gorgeous George was so over, I don't remember him holding any major belts at the time, because his appearance alone would draw crowds and draw heat. Now, with the second person that's in the intellectual savior category, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. Now, a lot of people forget how cerebral Buddy Rogers played his character. To call yourself the Nature Boy, very in shape wrestler. He could go 60-minute matches at any time, but his mic work was so impressive in relaying the fact he thought he was king of the hill, that he was so superior to anybody in the crowd, any opponent he had, and it showed off. He was WWF champion, he was NWA champion. Injuries kind of halted his career, and why do you think Ric Flair ripped off his character? Because he wanted to continue with that intellectual superiority gimmick, which made a lot of cash for Buddy Rogers and his handlers. Now, the next one on the list is kind of an obviously Freddie Blassie. Freddie Blassie was the king of West Coast wrestling for a lot of years. He's the guy that kind of perfected the way of presenting a television shoot better than anybody else. And most of his shoots were about attacking the crowds that basically thought he was inferior. Freddie Blassie wasn't the greatest wrestler on the planet, but his hard work ethic really showed in a lot of key matches, even against the Sheik and some of the larger wrestlers of his time. Now, Blassie became a manager later on, and he's the one that invented the term pencil neck geek. Now, if that's not a put down of the inferior people in the crowd, I don't know what is. Now, next on the list is a very important champion in the history of the AWA, Nick Bockwinkel. Now, Nick Bockwinkel was almost senatorial in the way he would present his thoughts about his matches with wrestlers such as Bad Dog Vachon, the owner of the AWA, Vern Gagne. He was dripping with sarcasm most days and most events where he was giving a presentation, but he could back it up. As cerebral as he was when the mic was on, he was just as cerebral off TV. A few people that I know have met him found him to be extremely well-read and intelligent. His derision for the crowd was very limited because basically he would never really acknowledge them when he came in the ring. Like, the crowd was there and he said, I'm here to do work, here to keep my belt, and the crowd really doesn't exist. Now, the next one is somebody close to home, Atlantic Grand Prix wrestling veteran, Leapin' Lanny, or he later called himself the Genius. Now, he perfected a different version of the superiority. He is and still is a great poet, a great writer, kind of the poet laureate of WWF. And he's worked on behalf of his brother, Macho Man Savage, on behalf of Mr. Perfect as a manager in different teams. He basically would do shoots that would parlay his intelligence in poetry form. It was very, very unique how he did it. And Leapin' Lanny could wrestle, but it came after a point. His missives of mirth against the crowd became more important than his own style. Now, next on the list is someone that is part of the UK cerebral contingent, William Regal. Now, William Regal got his big start in WCW, in North America. Eventually ended up in WWE. And William Regal was probably one of the best shoot fighters of all time. But his mic skills and his attitude towards the crowd was very direct. He didn't use the old British superiority cliche. He used his own style to say, listen, you're going to learn from me. I'm going to learn that wrestler across the way. Watch Sunshine and you will see something. And it worked. Now, the Canadian version of William Regal was around the same time. ECW and WCW veteran Lance Storm. Lance was a little bit more subtle. Imagine the Canadian version of William Regal, but with a little bit of a tinge of a superior hockey player in the NHL. Lance held countless belts in WCW at the same time, and he used that superiority of presentation to really bring forward what he wanted to say. When he said something, people listened, and the crowd hated him. He was dripping with confidence, and he hated him. And the next person we're talking about had sort of that Lance Storm swag, Damien Sandow. When Damien Sandow started his career in WWE, he really went nowhere. And for some reason, Vince realigned the character as a combination of Leap and Lanny with a little bit of William Regal, and it worked. It took Sandow a little while, but he got over very quickly. He would enter the ring almost like in sartorial splendor with a smoking jacket and a grease back hair, and he would basically tell everybody, you should be so glad I'm here. You're only learning from me right now. Now, Damien Sandow unfortunately has faded away from wrestling, but his cosmic brother, Elias, which I call the musician genius class. Now, Elias is still rising as a star in WWE. If anybody watches Raw, he basically comes out every week and he sings a very direct ditty towards what used to be the crowd, or the place he was wrestling, but now with the Bobby Lashley situation, he's over like crazy. He's one of the few genius characters that are over in a positive light. His tagline is "Walk with Elias," and that's what you have to do. You never know where he's going to go with his genius character. Now, I thought I'd keep the last two, the best for last, as we say. Bobby the Brain Heenan and Paul Heyman. As wrestlers, they were terrible, but as managers and commentators and developers, not too many people are better than the Brain and Mr. Heyman. Bobby the Brain Heenan got his major start at AWA, and as a manager, actually he was linked with Nick Bockwinkel for a number of years as his second voice. Now, if you haven't seen Bobby the Brain Heenan, it's a joy to behold. He is so intensely, he's intense hatred of the audience because they would call him the Weasel, and they would chant that, and he was so over. Only he could be the manager of Andre the Giant when Andre turned against Hulk Hogan in WWE to eventually lose to Hogan at WrestleMania 3 and take the title in nefarious means a few months later. Bobby would have his own stable. Each of the stable would have aspect of his genius character, and it would take hours and hours and hours to tell the stories of Bobby the Brain Heenan, but for those who love the Brain or the Weasel, you know what I'm talking about. And finally, the kingpin of the Dangerous Alliance, ECW, his name is Paul Heyman. Now, Paul Heyman, on air, off air, and everything he does, is probably the greatest wrestling mind, ounce for ounce, pound for pound, in wrestling history. Everything he's done ever since he was a young, intrepid reporter shooting photos at wrestling cards and selling them to various magazines, to now as the advocate for Universal Champion Brock Lesnar, he's never been of the crowd. He's always set his own pace. Nothing he's done in wrestling has ever been questioned too much. He took a small federation of ECW and rebranded it and changed it so much it changed not only wrestling history, but television history and sports entertainment history. The man is the John Wayne of wrestling. Because what John Wayne used to do, he evolved with the times, and that's what Paul Heyman has done over the years. Now, he may have gained a little bit of weight. He may have had, he's great bouffant and mullet fade over time. But, he's still as dangerous as ever. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you're here today listening to my podcast. And just a shout out, we just passed 2,000 views on my podcast channel, and thanks everybody across Northern New Brunswick, Eastern Canada, U.S., out west, everybody for supporting. If you like this podcast, give me a like. If you would like to subscribe to my podcast, please do so. Suggestions are always taken at govcarrier@hotmail.com or my Facebook link at JJ Carrier. Again, this podcast channel is for you. Hopefully, with more suggestions, we get more hits. I'd like to see 5,000 views by March because we're launching a new project on the podcast channel that we want the public to be involved with. We'll have more details by February 14th. So stay tuned, and if you have your own suggestion for intellectual savior of the masses in wrestling history, please let me know. I know there's a few I missed, but I'm not that smart. If I was, this podcast would be 40 minutes long, be 400 people. So anyway, as we like to say to Wrestling Ring, keep your head up. Have a great day. Bye.